What does an alliance look like at the end of the world? Does it look like flags raised in solidarity? Like treaties signed in grand halls by men in tailored suits? Or does it look like something far stranger? Something forged in desperation and baptized in blood? Picture this. The 5th of May, 1945. The war in Europe is, for all intents and purposes, over. Hitler is dead. Berlin has fallen. The surrender is a matter of mere hours. But here, in a storybook valley nestled in the Austrian Tyrol, the war is very much alive. A medieval castle, a fortress of ancient stone and towering turrets called Schloss Itter, is under a full-scale siege, and inside, a small, desperate band of defenders are preparing for their last stand. Who are these defenders? This is where the story fractures from reality and plunges into the realm of the truly absurd. There is a small group of American GIs, led by a battle-hardened tanker, Captain Jack Lee. Their only heavy weapon, a Sherman tank named Besotten Jenny, is currently a flaming, useless wreck at the castle's main gate. Fighting alongside them, firing from the same windows, sharing the same dwindling ammunition, is a small group of German Wehrmacht soldiers, men who, just 24 hours ago, were the sworn mortal enemies of the Americans. They are led by a highly decorated and respected Wehrmacht officer, Major Josef Gangl. And who are they protecting with their lives? They are protecting a bizarre and priceless collection of French VIPs, the prisoners of honor of the now dead Third Reich. Former prime ministers, famous generals, the supreme commanders of the French army, a national tennis star, the political ghosts of a fallen France who are now themselves taking up arms to defend their lives. And who is attacking them? Their enemy is a relentless, fanatical force of Waffen-SS soldiers, the true believers, die-hard loyalists of a Reich that has already ceased to exist, men who would rather die than surrender, and who have been given one final grim order: execute the high-value prisoners of Castle Itter. So let's paint that picture one last time in all its magnificent insanity. American soldiers and German soldiers fighting and dying side by side, defending a medieval Austrian castle, protecting French politicians from other German soldiers. This is not a Hollywood script. This is not a work of fiction. This was a real battle. A singular, surreal moment in the tapestry of history where the lines of loyalty, nation, and enmity all dissolved, replaced by a simple, brutal clarity. It was a battle between those who had accepted the end and those who wanted to drag the world into the grave with them. This is the story of the strangest, most improbable, and perhaps the most heroic battle of World War II. To understand the desperate battle that would soon rage around its ancient walls, you must first understand the prize. What was so important about this fairy tale castle, perched on a hill overlooking the Austrian countryside? The answer lay not in its strategic value, but in the unique and valuable nature of its unwilling residents. Schloss Itter was not a concentration camp in the horrifying image of Auschwitz or Dachau. There were no barbed wire fences, no skeletal figures in striped pajamas, no gas chambers. On the surface, it was a place of eerie beauty. But it was a prison nonetheless, a subsidiary of the Dachau camp system, designated for a very special category of prisoner. They were the Ehrenhaftlinge, the prisoners of honor. This was a collection of high-value individuals, mostly French, whom Heinrich Himmler and the SS believed could be used as bargaining chips in the final desperate negotiations of the war. They were, in essence, Hitler's political hostages, living relics of a Europe he had conquered. Who were these ghosts of a fallen France, rattling their chains in a gilded cage? The list was a who's who of the French Third Republic. There was Édouard Daladier, the French Prime Minister who had stood beside Neville Chamberlain and signed the infamous Munich Agreement with Hitler in 1938, a man who had tried to appease the beast and failed. There was his bitter political rival, Paul Reynaud, the defiant prime minister who had refused to surrender to Germany in 1940, a man of fire and passion who was ultimately betrayed by his own government and the collaborationist Vichy regime. There was General Maurice Gamelin, the supreme commander of the Allied forces in France at the start of the war, a man whose reputation was shattered by the speed and ferocity of the German Blitzkrieg. A general blamed by many for the catastrophic collapse of his nation's defenses. And there was his arch-nemesis, General Maxime Weygand, the man who had replaced him in the final desperate days, another towering controversial figure of the French military establishment. Also within the walls were Michel Clemenceau, the son of the legendary French leader Georges Clemenceau, a former leader of France's largest right-wing party, a famous trade union boss, and even Marie-Agnès de Gaulle, the older sister of the leader of the Free French forces, General Charles de Gaulle, a woman imprisoned purely for her name. And then, adding another layer of surrealism to this strange assembly, there was Jean Bourrata, a man known to the world not as a politician, but as the Bounding Basque. He was one of the legendary Four Musketeers of French tennis, a multiple Grand Slam winner, a Wimbledon champion, a global sports icon from the Roaring Twenties, a national hero of a different kind, now sharing a prison with the men who had once run his country. Their life at Castle Itter was a paradox of luxury and dread. They were prisoners, but they lived in well-appointed rooms, were served meals by staff, who were, in a dark twist, actual prisoners from the main Dachau camp, and were allowed to walk the castle grounds and enjoyed stunning alpine views. But it was a gilded cage, surrounded by stone walls and armed SS guards. They were cut off from the world, with no news of their families or the progress of the war, their every move watched. They were ghosts in their own lives, forced to live together, these old political rivals, stewing in a pot of past resentments and present anxieties. They argued endlessly about who had lost France. They debated politics. They played tennis on the castle's court. And they waited. They waited for the war to end, wondering with a gnawing dread if they would be the final pawns to be sacrificed in Hitler's endgame. Would they be liberated, or would the SS, in its death throes, decide that they were more valuable dead than alive? By late April of 1945, the world outside their idyllic prison walls was imploding. The Third Reich, the empire that was supposed to last 1,000 years, was collapsing into a state of absolute chaos and anarchy. The meticulously organized German war machine had disintegrated into a patchwork of isolated, desperate units. American and Soviet forces were slicing into the heart of Germany from the west and the east. Hitler was in his bunker in Berlin, a mad king presiding over a kingdom of ghosts and rubble, preparing for his final, pathetic exit from the world stage. In the Austrian Tyrol, where Castle Itter was located, the situation was particularly volatile. The area was a chaotic mix of retreating, disillusioned Wehrmacht, the regular German army, soldiers who knew the war was lost and just wanted to get home alive, and pockets of fanatical, die-hard Waffen-SS units who refused to accept reality. For the SS, surrender was not an option. Their code was one of loyalty unto death, and they intended to fight to the very last man, taking as many traitors and enemies with them as possible. They were the feral, dying beasts of the Nazi regime, and they were at their most dangerous. Into this chaotic, collapsing landscape, we must introduce the men who would soon become the castle's unlikely saviors. First, there was Captain John Jack Lee, Jr. Lee was a quintessential American tanker, the commander of a company of Sherman tanks from the 12th Armored Division. He was young, just 27 years old, but he was already a hardened veteran of the brutal fighting across Germany. He was a pragmatic, no-nonsense officer, deeply committed to his men, and focused on a single, clear objective: killing the enemy and winning the war. He was not an idealist. He was a professional soldier whose entire world was defined in black and white. There was his side, and there was the enemy. The idea of ever fighting alongside Germans was as alien to him as the idea of flying to the moon. And then there was Major Josef Gangl. Gangl was the very image of a professional German officer, a highly decorated and respected veteran of the campaigns in France and on the brutal Eastern Front. He was a man who had served his country with honor and distinction, but he was not a Nazi. He was a soldier of the Wehrmacht, and like many in the regular army, he had grown to despise the arrogance, the ideological fanaticism, and the barbaric cruelty of the SS. He saw them as a cancer that had corrupted his homeland, dishonored the German military, and led his people to utter ruin. As the Reich collapsed, Major Gangl was faced with a profound crisis of conscience. His oath of loyalty had been to a government that no longer existed, and a leader who was now a raving madman in a bunker. His true loyalty, he decided, was not to the dying Nazi party, but to the German and Austrian people who were being sacrificed in a pointless final slaughter. He had broken ranks. He was now secretly working with the local Austrian resistance, trying to save towns and villages from the senseless destruction of the war's final days. He was, in effect, a rebel in a German uniform, a man of honor in a world that had lost its mind. And finally, there was the antagonist of our story, the Waffen-SS, specifically elements of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division Götz von Berlichingen. These were not the disillusioned, war-weary soldiers of the Wehrmacht. These were the true believers, the ideologically hardened fanatics. They were well-armed, battle-tested, and utterly ruthless. They viewed the Wehrmacht soldiers who were surrendering as traitors, worthy only of being shot on sight. And they knew all about the high-value prisoners in Castle Itter. As the American army drew closer, the SS began to close in on the castle, their intentions chillingly clear. They would not allow those prisoners to be liberated. They were under orders to execute them all. These three forces, a pragmatic American captain, a disillusioned German major with a conscience, and a fanatical SS unit with a final murderous mission were on a collision course, and the strange, beautiful Castle Itter was about to become the epicenter of their violent and utterly improbable convergence.
The final surreal act of the drama began on May 4, 1945. The last official SS commandant of Castle Itter, a man named Sebastian Wimmer, had sensed the changing winds. Fearing retribution from the locals, he had abandoned his post and fled. In the power vacuum, the French prisoners, with the help of a few sympathetic guards, had managed to take a degree of control over the castle. They were free, but they were also trapped. They could see SS patrols moving through the woods around the castle. Their liberation was a fragile, terrifying thing that could be snuffed out at any moment. They needed help, and they needed it now. Their only hope was a man named Zvonimir Churchkovich, a courageous Yugoslavian political prisoner who had been working as the castle's handyman. Under the cover of darkness, he bluffed his way past the remaining guards, grabbed a bicycle, and set out on a desperate, near-suicidal mission. He carried a letter from the prisoners, and his goal was to find the American army. He was a lone man, cycling through a landscape teeming with rogue SS patrols who would have shot him on sight. But he made it. He found a forward unit of the American 103rd Infantry Division in the city of Innsbruck and delivered his urgent message. The Americans were now aware of the prisoners' plight, but they were miles away, and an immediate large-scale rescue was not feasible. Meanwhile, back at the castle, with no word from Churchkovich, the prisoners decided to send out another messenger. This was Andreas Krobot, the castle's Czech cook. He made his way to the nearby town of Worgl, not in search of the Americans, but in search of Major Gangl. He had heard whispers of the German major who was working with the Austrian resistance. The meeting between the cook and Major Gangl was fraught with tension. Gangl knew that helping the prisoners at Itter would be an open, final act of treason against what was left of the German command. It would mean declaring war on the SS. But he also knew it was the right thing to do. He agreed to help. He gathered his small band of about 20 loyal Wehrmacht soldiers who had also had enough of the Nazis and prepared to head to the castle. But he knew he was hopelessly outgunned. His handful of men with rifles were no match for an organized SS assault with armor and artillery. He needed more firepower. He needed an alliance. He needed the Americans. So Major Gangl made the most dangerous decision of his life. He took a single soldier, a large white flag, and drove his Kulbewagen directly towards the American lines. This was the moment of ultimate risk. He could be shot in the back by the SS as a traitor, or he could be shot in the front by the Americans as an enemy soldier trying to lure them into a trap. He found the forward command post of the 23rd Tank Battalion, 12th Armored Division. He walked into the makeshift headquarters in a local farmhouse, a German major in full uniform, his Knight's Cross hanging from his neck, and came face to face with Captain Jack Lee. Imagine the scene. A dusty room in a small Austrian town. An American tank captain who has spent the last year of his life fighting and killing men who wore the exact same uniform as the man standing before him is suddenly confronted by a German major asking for his help to go and fight other Germans. It was beyond surreal. Lee's first instinct, the instinct of a soldier who had survived by trusting no one on the other side, was that it was an elaborate trap. He was suspicious, hostile, his hand not far from his pistol. But Gangl was calm, professional, and sincere. He laid out the situation with military precision, the high-value French prisoners, their importance, the imminent and very real threat from the Waffen-SS, his own small force of Wehrmacht soldiers willing to fight and die alongside the Americans. As he listened, the absurdity of the situation began to give way to a dawning sense of its historic importance. Freeing men like Reynaud and Daladier would be a major propaganda victory. And there was something in Gangl's eyes, a look of weary honor that he found believable. Lee, a man known for his willingness to bend the rules and act on his gut, made a decision that was far above his pay grade, a decision that could have gotten him court-martialed. Without official orders from his high command, he agreed to go. The most improbable alliance of the Second World War had just been forged in a small room between two men who by all rights should have been mortal enemies.
Captain Lee's ad hoc rescue force was dangerously, almost laughably small. High Command had forbidden a full-scale operation, so Lee had to act on his own authority. He could only spare one of his Sherman tanks, which he nicknamed Besotten Jenny, and a handful of his own GIs, barely 14 men. His small American contingent, along with Major Gangl and 10 of his remaining German soldiers, made their way up the winding wooded road to Castle Itter. On the way, they fought off a small SS blocking party, the first shots of their strange new war being fired. Their arrival at the castle was a scene of tense, surreal introductions. The aristocratic French prisoners, who had been peering nervously from the battlements, stared in utter disbelief as American and German soldiers, their supposed liberators and their former jailers, began to work together, preparing the ancient castle for the inevitable assault. Old battle plans were laid out on antique tables by General Gamelin. The single Sherman tank was placed in a key position to guard the main gate. The limited ammunition was distributed amongst the new, strange allies. The total number of defenders was fewer than 30 fighting men. The most extraordinary transformation was in the prisoners themselves. These were not soldiers, they were politicians, diplomats, and in one case, a world-famous tennis star. But the instinct for survival is a powerful motivator. The French prime ministers, Reynaud and Daladier, acted as runners, carrying ammunition and messages between defensive positions. General Weygand helped organize the defense of the castle's upper levels, and Jean Borotra, the tennis player, proved to be one of the most athletic and courageous defenders of all. His natural agility and fearlessness were astonishing. He would vault over castle walls to relay messages, run through sniper fire as if dodging a volley on the court, and became an invaluable part of the defense. The SS attack began with probing assaults in the early morning hours of May 5th. Snipers took up positions in the trees. Machine guns opened up from the woods, their tracer rounds ricocheting off the ancient stone walls. The defenders, both American and German, returned fire, a bizarre symphony of American M1 Garands and German Kar 98K rifles firing from the same ramparts at a common enemy. The main assault came later that morning. The SS, growing impatient, brought up their heavy weapon, an 88mm anti-aircraft gun, a weapon feared by Allied tankers throughout the war. They took aim at the castle's main gate. The first high-velocity shell slammed into Besotten Jenny, the lone Sherman tank. It erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in a series of violent explosions. The castle's main line of defense, its only piece of armor, was gone. The fighting became desperate. The SS infantry, emboldened, began to storm the castle walls. The defenders were running critically low on ammunition. It was during the height of this attack that the strange alliance paid its highest and most tragic price. Major Josef Gangl, the German officer who had risked everything to do the right thing, was on the battlements, trying to get the former Prime Minister Paul Reynaud to take cover from the intense sniper fire. As he stood exposed, urging the politician to safety, the sharp crack of a sniper's rifle echoed across the courtyard. Gangl fell, killed instantly by a single, well-aimed bullet. The German hero of the Battle of Castle Itter had died saving a French leader from a German bullet while fighting alongside American soldiers. The tragic, perfect irony of his sacrifice was the ultimate symbol of the battle itself. By early afternoon, the situation was hopeless. The defenders had almost no ammunition left. The SS had breached the main gate and were pouring into the lower levels of the castle. Captain Lee ordered his men and the remaining defenders to fall back to the keep, the heavily fortified central structure, for a final, suicidal last stand. They were preparing to die, fighting to the last man. And then they heard it. In the distance, a new sound. Not the familiar crack of German rifles or the explosions of their own dwindling grenades. It was the unmistakable, deep-throated rumble and metallic clatter of Sherman tanks. Lots of them. The 142nd Infantry Regiment, the main American force that had finally been spurred into action by a reconnaissance mission led by Jean Bourratras, had finally arrived. The relief force smashed through the SS lines like a sledgehammer, their 50-caliber machine guns blazing. The SS, caught between the castle's defiant defenders and the arriving American tanks, broke and fled. The siege was over. The Battle of Castle Itter was over. The French VIPs were safe, their long, surreal imprisonment finally at an end. Captain Jack Lee and his handful of GIs had survived against impossible odds. But the strange alliance that had made it all possible had vanished as quickly as it had formed. The remaining German Wehrmacht soldiers, the men who had just fought and bled and died alongside the Americans, were now officially prisoners of war. Such were the strange, contradictory rules at the end of a very strange war. Captain Jack Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor, for his incredible leadership and bravery. The legacy of Major Josef Gangl, the German hero who made the ultimate sacrifice for his conscience, lives on in Austria. The nearby town of Wurgl named a street in his honor, a permanent reminder of the German officer who chose honor over ideology. The French prisoners were returned to a liberated France, where they would once again step onto the political stage, forever bonded by their shared experience in the gilded cage. But what is the true legacy of this battle? It was a tiny, insignificant skirmish in the grand, bloody tapestry of World War II. It had no strategic impact on the outcome of the war. It is a footnote, a historical curiosity in the vast encyclopedia of the conflict. And yet, it is perhaps one of the most important and deeply human stories of the entire war, because for one brief, shining, and utterly insane moment, in a fairy tale castle in the Austrian Alps, the complex man-made labels of American, German, French, enemy, and ally all melted away. They were replaced by simpler, more fundamental identities: defender, protector, tyrant, and fanatic. It was a moment where sworn enemies looked past the uniforms, the flags, and the years of bloodshed and saw their shared humanity, uniting against a common ideological poison that refused to die with the regime that had spawned it. The Battle of Castle Itter is an anomaly of history, a bizarre and beautiful exception to the brutal, dehumanizing rules of war. It is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest, most violent of times, the capacity for honor, for decency, and for choosing the right path over the easy one can shine through in the most unexpected of places. It is the story of a battle that should never have happened, fought by an army that should never have existed, and a testament to the extraordinary things people are capable of when they fight not for a flag, but for a cause that is truly, undeniably just.